And we are live.
Welcome, our YouTube viewers. And I think today we are also live on LinkedIn. So, welcome, LinkedIn, to the Ancestral Healing Center chat where Michael, Bernadette, and myself have a wonderful time, laughing a lot, actually, diving into the subject of ancestral healing. And today we have a very special episode for you. And it came off of last week's episode. So we're going to be sticking with this theme of immigrants, but we're going to be bringing it into the present. And so today's episode is Ancestral Healing for Today's Immigrant. And we are going to be sharing 3 of the top themes that come up in immigrants' lives and how ancestral healing and genealogy, trauma-informed genealogy specifically, can be a support for you if you're an immigrant or if you're married to one as well, if you have immigrants in your family. So today I wanted to start off with the story that brought us to this topic. So last week I was telling Michael and Bernadette that I recently visited my old neighborhood in Midtown Manhattan on 27th Street, and I had left that neighborhood during COVID. And that was a very tumultuous time for me. I loved my neighborhood, so in some ways I was kind of displaced because of COVID. And one of the saddest points for me was when I was walking with my dog down the neighborhood, and someone tried to attack me. So I ran into my noodle shop. And back during COVID, I ran into my noodle shop, and the man started to come into the shop, but he left. And he terrified that young immigrant boy. It was an immigrant family who was working in there. And the noodle shop never opened up again after that. Now, I don't know if that was just a coincidence or because the neighborhood was getting too unpleasant because of COVID. Anyway, I'm back in New York recently, and a new noodle shop has opened up next door to where that one was. So I pop in to go get noodles, and I meet the young man behind the counter who's making my noodles. He is an immigrant from Taiwan, and he and I started having a conversation about being an immigrant. And he was telling me how I told him the story of what happened, that I was attacked and I had to leave, and I was so sad, and that I was happy to see a noodle shop here again and welcome. And how did he like the city? And he said, well, I love the city, but I also have been mistreated since I've been here. And then that, he said, I kind of feel like an outsider. I don't know if I'm going to stay. And I said, well, I understand that. So I had moved to New York from West Virginia when I was younger. So we're having this lovely conversation. And I said, well, my family's immigrants as well. And he said, oh, really? And I said, well, they were immigrants 150 years ago, but they probably had a similar experience to yours. And it was just a lovely conversation and connection with him about how some things don't change and the human experience really stays the same from one generation to another. Now, we were talking about that, and I know, Bernadette, you brought up that there are some differences in immigrants today versus immigrants, 150 years ago. So would you like to share some of the main differences?
Well, I think let's start with what is similar, and what's similar is the decision to step on the boat, to step on the plane, to make that decision to leave your cultural home where you've been raised, and there's something that I grew up on the East Coast. There's something about being a New Yorker, or being that you're so familiar with how people react to you, and just how your sense of self, because this is all about talking about identity. And so, that never changes. So whether it is 100 years ago or it is somebody who is like this young man with probably his family that made this journey, over and just opened the noodle shop. They had to make that decision, and there is so much uncertainty. And for them, for the immigrants now, they also have this, they can see what immigrants in the past have gone through, and it isn't pretty. So, there's a lot of, I'm sure, anxiety that comes with it, in just knowing that I am going to struggle with all these things, with my language, with whether people are going to look at me, how they're going to look at me, just the way the young man that you ran into in the store. There's so much of so many similarities for immigrants to connect, to understand that this is what the immigrant path is, and to know that there's a broader, because the way America 250 years later, there is so much more integration of different cultures. That is where we do try and celebrate the cultures that have come. So there's that also as a positive. And then the other thing that came up is the fact that we can communicate, people who do come now, because of the way that we're able, cell phones and Zoom and all these things that we're able to do, can stay in touch with their family back home, where many of the immigrants that came years ago, they said goodbye forever the moment they left. But, it's a much bigger conversation, but just for a few little things, those are the things that just came up.
Yeah. So, and Michael, you have immigrated.
Yes, I am an immigrant, married to I'm a multi-immigrant, married to an immigrant. So I was born in Britain, and then when I was 7, we immigrated to Switzerland, and that was economic migration. My father was working for a Swiss company, so we migrated for economic reasons. And then when I was 12, we emigrated to New Zealand. And that was a much more complex journey, which it's almost taken half a century for me to unravel the drivers and the family that were behind that. And so what I see when I look at the span of immigration over time, over this last 150 years, what I notice is that when you go back to that older immigration, there was the expectation that whoever was coming in at the bottom, and that was the price of coming in. Mm-hmm. And there was that dynamic was kind of accepted. And now what I'm seeing is that on both the people coming in and the people who are here, there are people who are saying we want to make a home for people now. We don't want to create this stratified thing. We're seeing the value and the color and the vibrancy that comes from the diversity, and so I think even though we're still seeing some instances here, and there's very much here in Britain, there's a very polarized arguments around immigration. There are some people clinging to the very traditional positions, but also we're seeing people saying, hey, there is huge value in this migration. So I think that is a positive that's happening today. And I definitely think for people coming in today that it's not about coming in at the bottom.
Well, let's focus a little bit on identity. Mm-hmm. So talk to me about the issues that immigrants have, even if they willingly are moving, that maybe they're not forced, but something drastically changes in you when you uproot your life. So tell me a little bit about identity and immigration.
I think it can vary a lot depending on what the driving circumstances are, and I think it's very different if you're So one of the reasons we moved, or the reason that was given in the 1970s, says my parents were very unhappy with the situation in Europe at that time. There was the Cold War was sort of at its intensity. There were a lot of negative fears, and there was this move to New Zealand was seen as going to somewhere that was safer and greener. So there was one set of reasons. But if you look at, some people are moving because they have to. And so, for instance, I had a client who was from a refugee family displaced by one of the wars in the Middle East. They were actually born in Europe. Then they spent most of their upbringing in Saudi Arabia. And then finally the family landed in Canada. And as a young adult, my client does not relate to any of these places.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where the idea, if you're making a choice to go, you're carrying a good deal of your identity with you. But if you're having to go, and I'm going to be quick here because Bernadette's pitching. That's right. If you're having to go because your entire community, your culture has literally been bombed to pieces, mm-hmm. and you arrive in these other places, and it's not that those places don't make sense, it's that you don't make sense.
That was worth sharing, Michael. It's just in this small amount of time that we've been talking, and as Ruschelle said before we got on live, this is such a bigger conversation. There's so many layers to it, and Michael, you just laid it out there. That one of those very deep layers, and what was coming up for me was two different things. One was the person that somebody that I have connected with, and the reason for coming was they couldn't make a living there. They were coming for economic reasons to, and that's why they came and worked as hard as they did. And I also, I've worked with somebody who, this is fascinating. She left, she's from South America, and she left because she came from an indigenous population. And she looks indigenous, and and when she was growing up, the country, the South American country was, bringing itself into the 21st century. But she was still looked upon as part of the being indigenous, and that it was shame. And she said there used to be a story told in her school. Every year they told the story, and it was not a pleasant story about not immigrant, but the indigenous people. And that was her, and the last name was her last name. And so she felt this shame every year. So she immigrating to the U.S. was to leave that behind. So it was something, and we've done some work around talking about, let's go back there, that let's bring honor to the indigenous population. She's in the Andean culture, beautiful culture. And so she is now starting to use her last name again, because she's feeling this. And that is one of the things that, when we think about what the positive impact that immigration has, this deep, beautiful culture that she's now able to share because she feels proud of it. And so there's that layer of identity when they come. Am I supposed to just assimilate, or can I come as the person who, from the culture that I came from?
So this is I want to kind of summarize the topic that you both described, which is this idea of being a part of a collective versus autonomy. And this happens as we're developing humans. So our whole developmental line, we're trying to figure out, am I connected or am I an individual? And then when we're in our family, we're trying to figure out, am I going to stay within the family, or how much am I going to deviate outside of the family? And so when we leave our homeland, we have a choice to make. How much am I going to hold on to my identity that I knew before, versus how much am I going to become this maybe new, different, autonomous person? And I think that's always a balancing act. Even though I didn't immigrate to a country, I came from the country to a city, and there are cultural differences there, so I can understand that. Michael, did you have that experience? What to hold on to and what to let go of when you?
It's very. I think this thing, it really is a balancing act. But so my conclusion from all of it is that you can't belong anywhere until you belong to yourself. Mm-hmm. And so the thing is are you running away from? Are you emigrating to run away from yourself? Because that's not going to work for you. You need to take the understanding of where you come from. So yes, definitely, and this happened in multiple ways, and some of them I wasn't aware of for a very long time. So, for instance, my father was born in Wales, and then there was a split and then his mother died early, and his father remarried in Britain, in England, and there was a split in the family, and the Welsh part. So my father got isolated from the rootstock of the family, which was actually in Wales. And so when he was growing up, he completely rejected. I don't know whether this was conscious or unconscious, but he completely rejected his Welsh heritage. There was no, it's very, very strong. You talk to a passionate Welshman or Welsh person, and you know about it. You know they are from Wales. There is no mistaking this. And that was all. There was none of that. And so that was all gone. And I had an experience a few years ago of meeting up with one of my cousins from that Welsh side of the family, and we went to visit her in Wales. And I remember I was just sitting on this beach, and I just broke down in tears, and I was just experiencing this Welshness that I'd never known, mm-hmm. and that should have been there. So there was a loss of identity. And you think it doesn't matter because you don't know about it, and actually it does matter because it's part of who you are. And if it's not there, and you don't have to like it, you don't have to go out and start singing along to the Welsh boys choir or whatever, mm-hmm. but it's recognizing it and honoring it. And when you do that, your belonging increases, and as your belonging increases, you can then fit into wherever you are in a healthier, more integrated way, because you're more integrated. There's whatever's going on inside you is going to be reflected in your external experience.
It's fascinating because I've just been looking up a bunch of pictures of old immigrants just because of the 250th. A lot of things have come up, and when you look at the people and you realize how it makes so much sense why people congregated, communities. So you had, Little Italy in New York, and you had the Jewish community, you had the German community, all of these where people were trying to do, Michael, just what you said, trying to not lose themselves because they don't know anything else other than the person that they have grown up. And some of the immigrants were very old. They weren't, Ruschelle, you mentioned that, your great-grandmother came over. Was it your great-grandmother that came over from Italy? Mm-hmm. So, she was, her life was getting towards the end of her life. And so this whole idea of identity, where coming in, as an immigrant, you're like, how do I balance this? How do I, assimilate, because I want to be part of this new community. I want to enjoy this multicultural and this ability to maybe do great things here. And so many of our immigrants have done amazing things and have brought science and art and all kinds of things to us. And at the same time, they went through that experience of coming and trying to figure out, do I go live in an area that doesn't have any that I'm one of many, or do I land in a place where, it's my culture and I'm here in my culture? There's so many ways, so many different things that they have to almost fight with internally, trying to figure out, how do I make this move? What does it look like?
And here in Britain, you can see that playing out with the Asian, the Indian and Pakistani immigration that happened after World War II, and you can see that there's a huge number of people who are very, very, very well integrated. You can see that there are communities that are still got. They're clearly those reflect those communities, but they're still positive communities, and they're places where they really are almost imploding. They're holding on to the old ways so deeply. And there's all problems with schooling, there's problems with the police, there's all manner of social problems going on because they've completely resisted the integration. And you can see that balancing act has been very successfully done, and you can see the vibrancy of that. And in other places, you can see where that balancing act has just failed.
So I just want to sum up this section. And I mean, there is so much here that we can talk about in terms of identity, but what I hear reflected from both of you is this phrase that my hypnosis teacher started off with the first day that I was in hypnosis, and it has always stuck with me. So that, that hypnosis is all about this idea of holding on and letting go. And a healthy mind is all about this idea of holding on and letting go. And we're constantly in this, just as humans, we're constantly in this calibration of what do I hold on to and what do I let go of. And immigration will really test that, is what I heard. So many things that we can dive into, the power of genealogy to support us, capturing your stories while you're doing it. If you're in your 30s and your 40s, your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, write your experience now, because that's going to be valuable for you later on. So that's identity. But we have a couple other themes that we want to get through today. And one is this idea of hidden grief. Some people may be grieving outwardly because they have to leave, and it may be just out in the open and very conscious because of the reasons why we've left. Possibly we've lost family, or we've lost status in our community, or our home physically because of war. But there's also disambiguous grief. And that is the grief that is, I chose to leave, so I shouldn't feel sad for this because this was my choice. So I know that Michael, you and Bernadette are going to have a lot of things to talk about in terms of where grief comes into this whole process. So where should we get started with grief?
Yeah, I'm very happy to start in on that one. And this again, and this shows both sides of this grieving thing. So we went to Switzerland when I was 7 years old, and this is again typical as an immigrant. You walk into systems that say, well, this is what you're going to do because you're an immigrant. And we walked into a system that said, because you're not born in Switzerland, you must go to a fee-paying school. Okay, so we walked into that rule. And say my parents were not particularly wealthy. We weren't going to the international school or anything like that. So we went to the cheapest school. And of course, the Catholics have the cheapest school, so they can hoover up all of these people and make a bit of money. So they know how to, they know how to work the system. So I ended up going to a Catholic primary school. And so I was, I think, 7 or 8 years old when I started there. And the way that they taught the times table was that you would stand at the front of the room and a nun would fire off these questions, what's 3 by 3, 4 by 4, whatever, and you had to answer quickly and correctly, and you had to hold your hand out like this, and they had a ruler, a wooden ruler, and if you didn't get it right, down came the ruler. And I say I was 8 years old and I didn't even speak the language. And I can tell you that to this day, I do mental calculation in Italian. And these are some of the things that you don't reckon into the picture. You don't see these things coming, and yet they can leave a lifelong impression. And I also had quite a long, let's say, inner, difficulties with Christianity as a result of that. So there was stuff that came out of it. But equally, my last memory, when I was 12, we left Switzerland. My last memory of Switzerland is the leaving day assembly at that school. And I can still see, I remember vividly, I was sitting next to the wall, and right next to me, right here, was this marble wall with some inscription in Latin. And I can just remember sitting next to it. And I can remember I was just crying because I didn't want to leave Switzerland. It had become the place that I knew. It had become my home. And yet we left. And we went and we started again somewhere else. And that grief just got buried. And again, it took a long time for me to understand that it was actually there.
And that what's so important about what you're saying, Michael, is when families immigrate, there's when an adult is immigrating and they are making a choice for themselves and bringing their children with them, and especially if the reason is we really have to, it doesn't make sense for us to stay here. We're not going to thrive here. It is, an adult can hold on to that thought all the way through the process of whatever is happening as they are coming into the country and what's going on. And a child doesn't have identity even at that, doesn't know what identity is. All they know is they move from place to place, in each day. I talked about how, this man told me who I was when I was, 8 years old. He asked me my name and I said, Bernadette O'Brien. And he said to me, oh, do you have a lot of brothers and sisters? And here I was, a little redheaded with freckles. And he was like, okay, she's an Irish Catholic child. And that's what that's it. Who came from a big family with a lot of children. And so children, somebody gives you your identity rather than you creating your identity. And I think for adults who immigrate, whether they're immigrating now or we're looking at ancestors that went through this process, there is part of them that is still that child inside. And so the grief, when they've made the decision, because this is important for us and this is something that is going to help us and it's going to be good for our family, there's so much grief when you're leaving, and knowing that that part of my life is over, and whatever beautiful parts of it, even when they go back, they don't get to experience it in the same way when they were steeped in it, and that was and who they were, and whether it's culturally or whether it's something about the family connection, the grief of coming, even when they're thrilled to be here and wanting to make this change, can be overpowering a way that they don't even see it. And it may come in, as you said, sometimes tears, just where they show up. Grief shows up in us in all different ways. It shows up in our bodies. And so it can show up as anger, it can show up as embarrassment, it can show up as just uncomfortableness. I mean, we call it grief. Sometimes we don't want to recognize that it's grief, and these other things are what it ends up showing up as. And that's just kind of what popped up for me as you were sharing your story, Michael.
Yeah, so the impact of immigration on our children is just immense. And I find it interesting that both of you said 8 years old. You said 8, right, Michael? You're 8.
Yes.
Bernadette, you mentioned 8 as an example. 8 is such a critical year for autonomy development and development of self. 8 years and then 12 years, right? These are big leaps in terms of knowing who we are in context of our environment. And so I want to take a minute and I want to pause. And I know Bernadette usually does the meditation, but I would actually like to just offer everyone listening just a couple of minutes of a brief meditation that I will absolutely attribute to Jonathan Parker, who's on YouTube, who I love and have been listening to a lot. But it's just a simple exercise of bringing back, when we have these experiences and we are in a place. Jonathan describes it as sometimes parts of us can be left there. We kind of fragment a little bit in that place. And this is just imagery. This has nothing to do with one's religion or anything like that. It's just an image of, boy, there I got shattered for a second. So what I'd like for us to do is just take a minute, we're going to close our eyes, and I'd like to just practice calling back the parts of ourselves that have been left in places and fragmented and maybe left in pain. So I'd like for you to just take a big inhale and exhale. Let's take another big inhale and exhale. And this exercise can apply to anyone at all times. You don't have to be an immigrant. Possibly I left part of myself at the gym this morning during a hard workout. So if you're listening and you just need a moment to kind of regroup and come back to yourself, this is absolutely for that as well. So I'd like for you to take a big inhale. And on your next exhale, I'd like for you to imagine this energy that exudes from you around your entire body. So just imagine your energy field, your life force. Maybe you can feel that life force pulsing through your fingers and toes. And just imagine that life force energy field out beyond yourself. And with your next inhale, we're just going to inhale, and as we exhale, you're going to call that energy force back in a little bit closer to you. So as if you could just draw your life force back in close. Take a big inhale. Just making it so that it's just about 10 inches around your body. And once you've drawn your life force back closer to you, I'd like for you to just pull up a memory or a person or a thing that you feel like might have taken a little bit of your energy or fragmented you a bit. So just take a big inhale and bring into your awareness that memory, that person, that experience. And then on your next inhale, you're just going to say to yourself, I call back all the parts of me from this moment or this person. So you can say it out loud or just say it internally, but we're just going to consciously call back all parts of ourselves. They're yours and they deserve to be home. Take another inhale. And if there's another memory or person or place that you might want to call your life force back from, you can do that now. And in your next inhale, just saying to yourself, I am whole. I am whole. I deserve to be whole. And there's nothing in this world that can take my life force from me fully. Take another big inhale. And just check in with yourself on what it's like to call back the lost or broken or fragmented parts of you, just bringing them back. Whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes. And it's been a while since we've done a meditation here on the channel. And sometimes after we do them, Michael or Bernadette or I like to share what happened. You don't have to share, but I will ask Michael or Bernadette anything that happened as you were with yourselves in that moment.
What came up for me was is that I've known this for some time, is that there are pieces of me that are back there in southern Switzerland, and that I need to go and pick them up. So that's I've been given that message before. So I don't have a definite date for that, but it's coming to the top of the list of the next next vacation discussion.
Yeah. And Michael, even in the event that you can never go back there, the mind is so powerful. And even in a moment, the body recognizes it as done. Some of us are never lucky enough to go back to the places that we love. They don't exist anymore.
Yeah, it's important to recognize that there are no barriers. You don't have to go.
No, it's lovely if we have the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very important to recognize that it's one of the things that I really encourage my clients is do not limit yourself on what is possible in terms of healing. And I would say that to everybody here, do not limit yourself.
Yes. And it's magical if you can go back to Switzerland. Absolutely valuable and magical. So I absolutely hope that for you, Michael. Bernadette, anything that you wanted to share?
Yeah, bringing up the 8-year-old, I went back there, was one of the places, and that was where there was confusion and, kind of just this, I don't know, there was something that wasn't good. I knew that it wasn't, he shouldn't have asked me that. For some reason, and the fact that I've held on to that for all these years, that I remember specifically what he said. And the other thing, though, was a positive, is I went back into my late teenage years, where I actually felt this sense of me becoming, this beginning sense of me coming. And what happens when that, that was a time where I didn't have huge responsibilities yet, in terms of, my responsibility was school and doing what, those types of things. And so I lost some of her along the way as life took over, and bringing her back in this moment felt good, to remind myself that she is here, in this life that I'm living right now, and she is part of my beginning. So that was a very that was a really interesting positive thing about doing it.
And that is a topic that we can maybe explore a little bit later, is this idea that our ancestral parts are not just our genetic lineage. We personally have ancestral parts from when we were very, very young, parts that are nonverbal, parts that are 8, that stay with us. They are echoes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and they are also to be honored. I think that was one of the big things that I learned. The book that I just wrote, called From Echo to Athena, it's about money, but really what it's about is honoring the parts of me that no longer need to be in my life anymore, front and center. And, you know, we don't want to bring our 8-year-old selves to work most of the time. We want them to be at home taken care of and not running around managing our finances or, you know, whatever. So, you know, that is maybe a topic for another day, but how does it relate to being an immigrant? Because you left your country at a certain age, and that was a pivotal point, whether you were 30 or 13 or 3, there was something happening in your life that was important enough that you leave your home, and that's a critical year and age for you to remember and honor. So that is you on an individual level. I do want to, we have one more topic, and I think this is probably going to run into next week's, I would say, but really, where does ancestral healing come into this, the journey of being an immigrant? We know that when we become an immigrant, we will have some level of survival patterns that come up, because you're kind of, you know, your adrenaline is on, because you're in a new environment, and you can't, even if you chose to go, you can't help it. So I want to list some of the common survival patterns that come up for immigrants, and then Michael, Bernadette, you guys just kind of pop in if any of them resonate for you. So one that's really big in America is working harder than everyone else. So this is right, we know that American immigrants are the backbone of the United States economy. And that's not just because they were forced to be. There's also a drive to prove and be successful and show up. We don't ask for help because we don't know who to trust. We're to stay quiet because people don't need to know our business. We certainly don't trust authority because we don't know the system well enough to do that. We need to save everything because there could be a crisis at any moment. We need to keep family issues private because we don't know who to turn to. And success equals our safety.
Yeah, I saw a documentary on Korean American families, and they were talking about the pressure to succeed. You know, it was like you're going to be a lawyer or a doctor or an accountant, and those are your options. And the clash between the younger generation with having, you know, saying I want to be a rapper, and the older ones saying you've got to do this. If you know this is the standard that we're imposing on you, and the conflict between the generations, between the older immigrant generation and the newer generation who were born here and have absorbed absorbed the American culture and its wondrous vibrancy.
What struck me powerfully was everything that you just named, Ruschelle, is what the ancestors went through as they came, and all immigrants go through this process. And so whether, as you were saying, whether your ancestors came 100 years ago, or whether you came 30 years ago, or whether the young man who is in the noodle shop in New York City right now, he's going through those same things. And the result is immigrants have created amazing things in our country and in any country that they have gone to, because of all of those reasons. Like, we need to almost like take advantage of this. We need to, it's this innate, like, I have to prove myself. It's not necessarily healthy, because there is a lot of difficult things that happen when you set that bar so high, rather, that you if you don't get up here, it means you haven't been successful. So there's all those different kinds of things, but I feel that the underlying strength of resilience is what immigrants bring to this country. The resilience of being able to they were the ones who came. They were the ones who said, all right, we're going to do this. We're going to go. And I know sometimes the circumstances were, they didn't have a choice. They had to get on. They had to go. But in many times it is people making that choice, and that in itself is incredible, and it shows a sense of a little bit of knowing who they are, because they're able to say, we're going to take this opportunity and we're going to go. So I mean, there's so much in there.
So the one thing that I heard in both of what you said is this idea of, and I think we've talked about it before, earned worth versus inherent worth. So as a person, we both need to feel valuable because we've earned our keep in our culture. And we also need to feel inherently valuable just because we exist. And a lot of immigrants, not all immigrants, but a lot of immigrants have left places and have this shame attached to their inherent value, meaning, and this is so common. This is actually probably the most common thing that I practiced therapy for in New York City across the board. The number one thing that I would see in my therapy office was, I'm a type A overworker. And I've gotten I can't go any further because I'm pushing. And what we realize is that we have a limit to push. And when we've reached that limit, we only have one choice, but to fall back on and look at our inherent value. And when we can do things like unlock shame and unlock grief, we can get to the core of, oh my God, I'm so valuable just because I exist. And not that I don't have to work hard, I can do really cool things, but I am so valuable. And I come from a family that is so valuable. So, I think as we kind of contemplate what our next episodes are going to be and things like that, we would love to hear from anyone listening. If you would like us to talk about something else, or if something today resonated with you. But really today we want people who are in situation of immigrants, or if you have loved ones that are immigrants, to know that, there is some identity change that's going on. There's probably some grief going on, even if it's unnamed. And there are tons of strengths that person has. I mean, I am amazed every day at my husband, every day, who's an immigrant from India, and just the path that he has made for himself. I'm sorry, you're crying. It's so inspiring to watch. So, we're really happy that you're here, and we hope that something we shared today was valuable. Michael, Bernadette, anything else you'd like to leave our audience with today?
I just want to say, wherever you come from, whatever your story is, you are standing on the shoulders of giants, of those who got you to where you are. And the more you know about them, not just in terms of the facts, but the more that you can sit with their journeys and their emotional, what they went through to get to where you are, the more you will have belonging with yourself, and the more you will have with that inherent worth piece, and the more easily you can then work with wherever it is that you now find yourself.
And I would just end with to celebrate yourself, to recognize just how special you are. I mean, we all need to do that, but especially those whose journeys haven't been easy. Sometimes that's hard. And so I would say to truly honor and celebrate who you are, both your culture and who you are wherever you are in the world right now. That's what I would.
Okay, well, we will look forward to seeing you next week here on the channel, and we'll be listening for if anyone has any ideas for next week's episode, and if not, we will be revisiting immigrant stories again next week as well. Thank you.